Thank you, Mr. Kanaraj. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker today is none other than that, Mr. Vincent Marguer. Today, his topic is from risk to requirements and approach to project initiation. When talking about our keynote speaker, Mr. Vincent has 17 years experience in life sciences at various geographical level as a program and project manager and commercial operations expert who specializes in bridging the gap between strategy and execution, ranging from research and development to commercial. He initially worked 5 years in the machine manufacturing industry, where he transitioned from industrialization to IT and management system, which led him to CRM implementation projects at Synergym, now IQVIA. I'm sorry for pronunciation. Following a stint in consulting, he joined the pharma industry and worked in specialty pharma, wide for pharma, rare diseases, and most recently in inhalable solutions. Vincent holds a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the Grenoble INP in France and both Prince 2 and PMP certification. Currently, he lives in Switzerland. So I cordially invite our keynote speaker, Mr. Vincent Maguire, to proceed with his valuable presentation. Over to you, Mr. Vincent.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the warm welcome and for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here today, at least virtually, right? I think next time I'll do my best to fly over. Because I heard it was a really great country. Invitation came out of the blue, but that's the magic of LinkedIn and networking, really. I mean, just ask. When I ask, I like to have an answer. When the answer in our case is, yeah, I'll do that, actually. I'm interested to share those kind of things, with my fellow project managers all around the world. And that's the reason why, well, we're going to have that presentation about risks to requirements. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Feel free to ask anything you like, or stop me if something is not clear, I want that to be very informal. And I hope that you'll get something out of it, but more on that at the end of the talk. So risk management is a dynamic component of any project where risks, but also opportunities, must constantly be assessed and monitored to deliver in a most successful way. Well, however, we get sometimes so carried away by the excitement of starting a project that we tend to jump straight into mapping out what must be delivered for the end user and the stakeholders, thus managing risks and opportunities, along the way, just on the side. I used to do that in my early projects, and although I did my best to schedule regular risk management reviews with my project teams, well, it was clearly not the most glamorous activity we undertook. On the contrary, I got a clear feeling that my teammates were dragging their feet when we dealt with risks and opportunity assessments. Oh no, not again. Well, they understood the reason and the impact of doing it, but it was not part of the project culture as such. Therefore, risk management was an activity put behind. As I moved into more complex drug development projects within the pharma industry, I realized that risk management had to be at the forefront of what we did. Because since the end user was eventually a patient, and sometimes we're all a patient anyway, so you get that, kind of feeling, we had to reduce the risk factor to the very strict acceptable minimum. It meant that a lot of constraints had to be considered for different reasons, whether compliance, ethic, regulatory, scientific, you name it, which led to various risk responses and mitigation strategies, which in turn would have an impact on the project developments and the product developments. And there came the idea of putting risks ahead of requirements, since in this case, the risk response may tell us what we shouldn't do and sometimes what we must do. Plus, with every risk mitigation strategy, we get an overview of time, costs, and resources, which, anyway, are the information we need for a work breakdown structure. Do you see what I'm getting at? Additionally, as project managers may know, risk and opportunity assessment is a great team building activity because no matter what the expertise of the project team member is, it all comes together when defining a situation that may arise and impact the product and the project. It puts everyone on the same page. And since we deal with risks straight from the start, it creates this risk culture that the project team will always refer to because it is simply one of the very first major activity they did together. This type of team building activity also sets the scene of how the project will be run. First, by empowering the team members. After all, they are the experts who can find the best way to mitigate these risks. Second, by keeping them focused and aligned, as several risks may require several types of expertise to be manageable. And finally, by helping define product requirements in a more contextual way. It is always easier to start with something already outlined rather than from a blank sheet of paper. So keep in mind, as a project manager, put yourself behind your team. They're the experts, they have the answers. All you have to do is actually facilitate that, lead them, make the best of each and every team member, and then put everything together. What we will see together today is a small, I call that methodology to achieve this, and what the project manager should particularly take care of. There is nothing new here, really, only things that we already do as project managers, but reshuffled and repacked in a different way. The examples I will use for illustration purposes are taken from my experience in the pharma industry, but I am confident that you will easily adapt them to your own work environments. The starting points of every project is a scope, as we all know. The project manager must make sure this is perfectly stated and agreed with the project sponsor, who, as you know, ultimately remains accountable for the delivery. The scope indicates the end user, whether it is in a specific market or not, and this makes an excellent gateway to the next step. Once the project scope is outlined, identifying the stakeholders is, to me, the next most important activity, as it provides some of the context and environments the project team will evolve in. There are several ways to do so. What I usually do is to map out some assumptions like what you see on screen here and discuss them with the project team during a kickoff meeting to trigger additional thoughts. Again, I find it more effective to provide something, even if it's wrong, than nothing at all. It makes them, get their thought right. It's like, no, Vincent, you're completely wrong here. We don't have that kind of stakeholders. Oh, yeah, we have that stakeholder, but we have even more, actually. So it can be both ways. And it's good, actually, to generate these kind of discussions up front with your team. I tend to place the end user in the middle to make sure the team keeps focus on that main stakeholder. Stakeholders, as you know, can be of any sort and from any environments, and some may not be obvious at first. So make sure you cover them all and you continuously manage them. I mean, that's regular standard project management. Once the scope is defined and the stakeholders are identified, we can now start what I call the project initiation journey, which is basically the sequence of all the activities that must be carried out to create the PID, project initiation documents. And in the pharma industry, a TPP, target product profile, is also required, which may then be presented for approval if, for instance, a stage gate validation process is in place in the company. There are different ways of making this journey. What you see here is a simplified way I use to show where the risk and opportunity assessment takes place. We will therefore focus on this first part here in blue, which is aimed to provide a shortcut to defining the requirements and the more regular activities which follow, like the WBS, resources, timelines, etc. You know them all. The project manager may consider that the following optional prerequisites are in place before starting the risk and opportunity assessments: SWOT, high-level assumptions, and the risk register. So let's talk about SWOTs. I guess you're all familiar with SWOT: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is a tool which I personally find useful to complement the stakeholder analysis, since it provides more context and environment to the project, both internally and externally. It can be applied to any project, and any project team can use it. And honestly, it is not overly complicated when done as a team. The outcome of the SWOT analysis also provides some elements that will be used in the risks and opportunity assessment, some obviously straight out of opportunities and threats, but others coming more from the internal side. As project manager, I spent a bit of time with the team on these 4 definitions here to make sure they are clearly understood before I ask the team to apply them. So keep that in mind: internal competitive factors, strengths and weaknesses; external marketplace factors, opportunities and threats. So how to apply SWOTs? Usually I do it like a small team building exercise, which may serve as an appetizer for what follows. Once the team understood the SWOT principles, and honestly spend some time on them if they're not clear, ask the person who initiated the project, which usually is the sponsor, but it could be someone else actually. I mean, that first person at the start of the project, to tell the team what the project is all about, what the expected delivery and outcomes should be, whether in terms of benefits, revenues, the expected timelines, the available budgets, etc., in as many details as possible. It has to be a compelling story. Usually it's, we like to do this for that market because there's a need here, etc. Here are some insights. That's an example of that kind of discussion or presentation we have. And in the meantime, ask the project team members to identify the statements that could qualify as strength, weakness, opportunity, or threats in their own individual way. There is no right or wrong answer, since every team member will perceive things differently based on his or her expertise. So that part here with the speaker and the team member should take maximum 20 minutes. And that's already a long discussion. A nice way, actually, a nice tip to do that is really to either you use the SWOT quadrants, you have a SWOT quadrant ready for the team, for all the team members, so that they can write directly in SWOT all these cells. Okay, that's what I heard. That's to me the strength, weakness, opportunity, or threat. Excuse me, that's something that could be done up front. But after that part, take about 40 minutes to reconcile. The project manager leads and facilitates the discussion with the team. What strength have you identified? What weakness? Tell me more about that. Let the team share what they wrote down. But again, as project manager, make sure you keep the ball rolling and do not hesitate to challenge them whenever you need or you think it may be relevant. As mentioned earlier, the outcome of this exercise is to bring more context and perspective to the project delivery by highlighting what we do best, what we struggle with, where we may have opportunities, and what we need to keep an eye on. Remember, here we are setting up the scene, but we are not yet into requirements per se. I also suggest a short break after such session, since it may sometimes become quite intense. And I had that in the past, and really 10 minutes break after that is usually very welcome. So second prerequisite, as I mentioned earlier, could be high-level assumptions. So preparing a short list of high-level assumptions together with the project sponsor ahead of the meeting with the project team may also be useful and may bring additional context. Those assumptions are usually based on experience and may be certain or not certain at all, with an impact that may vary completely, but it provides the project team with something better than a blank sheet of paper. Their expertise will contribute establishing assumptions with a higher certainty. So it is the role of the project manager to make sure the team focuses on assumptions with the highest uncertainty first, to clear them up until they move into the upper right quadrants. Doing this exercise ahead of the risk and opportunity assessment create a light framework for product requirements, and will help team focus more on the elements that really matter within the scope of the projects. The third small tool is a context diagram, which is another option the project manager may use ahead of the risk and opportunity assessments, since having different elements and assumptions with their dependencies represented in a graphic way may help the team go into more detail. My advice here, just don't overdo it, because you may restrain their thoughts and such diagram can get crowded very, very quickly. That's an example of a simplified version of one of the latest I use for inhalation projects. So now we are coming into the real risk and opportunity assessments. And while this may be an obvious activity for the project manager, it may not be so for other team members. I faced this situation several times in the past with colleagues who were not at all familiar with these concepts. Therefore, always make sure I do a quick and simple training or a reminder of how I would like the risk and opportunity assessment to be done and what I expect from them. So let's start with definition first. The project manager should start by explaining the difference between risk and issue to the project team. A risk is something that could occur in the future, is an uncertainty that we can create plans and strategies for and can be accepted. An issue is something that has occurred, is currently happening, could be an anticipated or unexpected risk that has materialized, is something that we need to address in the present, and it certainly cannot be accepted. It needs mitigation. So in a nutshell, a risk might happen, an issue has happened. Make sure the team understood this difference and feel free to remind them during the session. Risk statements are a short description of risk that everyone in the organization, from the top to the bottom, can read and get a clear idea of how an event can affect it if it were to occur. It has to be written in a very simple way, again, so that everyone can understand that within one sentence. So some examples, for instance, if a person swims too far away from the beach, they may be bitten by a shark, which may lead to serious injury or death. Or if a person falls from a boat into the ocean, they may be bitten by a shark, which may lead to serious injury or death. It's a bit far-fetched, but you get the picture of simple statements. Insist on the if-then impact formats, which will help the team formulate their ideas in a quick and easy way. It may happen that the consequence of an impact are always the same reductive one. For instance, then we can't launch the products. And you will have that 20 to 50 times, in a risk assessment. The project manager's role in this case is to accompany the thought process of the team member to be as precise as possible, using, for instance, the 5 why technique for coaching questions. So 5 whys, you're probably familiar with that. You ask why 5 times, so why, and every time you get different because. And at the end of it, you should get to the root cause of the risk of the statements. And that's something powerful enough, actually, in that kind of session. And it's participative as well. So other team members might actually jump into that, and you get into other ways and other risks, actually, while facilitating this. Some risks may also be extremely technical or specific, and not all the team members, including the project manager, will understand them. As project manager, ask for a short explanation. This time will not be wasted because it will allow the team to learn something new outside their respective expertise, and this is to be valued within a project team. Rating the probability and the severity of project risks helps the project manager identify which risks the team should focus their efforts on and which ones to communicate to stakeholders. Excuse me. Risk probability, how likely is the risk to happen? Risk severity is the risk were to occur. What would be the overall impact on the project? Risks can be assessed in different ways according to the governance in place. 3x3 or 4x5 matrices are common ways of doing so. You may have 10x10s, actually. I saw that once as well. It's a bit trickier to manage. But usually definitions of high, medium, low may also depend on the governance, but it's usually quite like the example you have on screen here. The project manager should focus most of the team efforts in the red zone and keep monitoring risks in the orange zone. But like for the risk statements, not all the risks are red, so make sure you accompany the thought process using, for example, the techniques I mentioned earlier. Once the risk or the opportunity has been clearly stated and prioritized, what will the response strategy be? So I consider the following three types. Accept, simply retain the risk by informed decision and monitor. So please be careful. This is not pretending the risk doesn't exist. You just simply accept it. Mitigate or reduce. Define and execute an action plan to either reduce likelihood and or severity to an acceptable level and increase detectability of risk, or eliminate risk completely within a defined period. And the third one, avoid not to start or continue with the activity that creates the risks. There's another one we all know as project managers within the PMI world. It's called transfer. So transfer is also a classic type of response, which to me belongs to the overall mitigate, reduce response, actually. So when all these concepts are well understood by project teams, the project manager can now run the risk and opportunity assessment workshop. There are several sessions actually in there. The first one should focus on stating risk and opportunities. Remember the if, then, impact formats. Everybody speaks, everybody has ideas, if, then what's the consequence, what the impact. And at the end of it, there should be a classification per type of expertise required to manage the risk or the opportunity. And you will see in that kind of sessions that you will have technical risks, you will have legal risks, compliant risks, ethic risks, regulatory in the life science business, could be different kind of areas. But it is important to have them classified at the end of that first session. And once the classification is done, this is where sub-teams within the project teams are formed. The objective of a sub-team is to assess the risk of the opportunity in further detail, prioritize them, and define a response. Typically, stating risk and opportunity should be done in one session, as I mentioned. So duration depends on the size and the scope of the project, but half a day is usually a good start and pretty intense. And the work done by sub-teams should take 2 weeks with as many sessions as you want. One thing to keep in mind is the project manager should lead each of these sessions within the sub-teams and encourage them to give their best. Keep the ball rolling, especially on this. The mitigate, reduce part within sub-teams is the one that will matter the most, because it is where all the ideas about what has to be put in place, how it should be designed, what constraint has to be respected, how much time it will take, etc., will come to life. And, well, this looks very much like defining the requirements for the products. But with a twist, within the framework, the project manager prepared ahead using the SWOT analysis, high-level assumptions, context diagrams, risk and assessments, or any other tool or concept that can support this approach. And once this is done within all the sub-teams, then the last session mirrors the very first one, where the sub-teams are back together to reconcile and discuss the risk responses, and therefore agreed on the requirements to be defined. Some of the responses from a sub-team may depend on the one from another. So mapping these dependencies may provide insights on timelines, costs, and resources needed, just like in a regular product requirement session. Requirements can then be further detailed using tools and techniques like Moscow, target product profile, etc. This is where the project goes back onto the standard track. And that's the part we basically all know. So as a conclusion, what we've seen this evening is yet another way to start a project. It requires a bit of preparation up front, depending on how best the project manager wants to run this approach. Using a SWOT analysis to involve the team with the environment and the context of the project. Using high-level assumptions to make the team map out some rough ideas within a framework. Using a context diagram to visualize key elements, assumptions, and their dependencies to help define the impact if one of these elements is at risk. Remember the diagram? If you move one thing, they might drag some other elements. What's the impact on that dragging here? And then once those are in place, the risk and opportunity assessment can start with the team fully into that risk mindset, which in turn will help generate mitigation strategies that will eventually lead to requirements. My estimation is roughly 75% of the requirements could be defined using risk and opportunities, and then the rest is 25% completely new, and that's where you're going to run another risk meeting or risk session actually on all those novelties. So you may think it is unconventional, and I agree it seems unsettling at times. And I had my sponsor actually the first time I used that, who is not into projects but more on the consumer side, and she was like, Vincent, I just don't understand what you're getting at with this. But at the end of it, she understood. It's like, wow, yeah, got that. But the thing is, when you manage to outline from the beginning what you expect from the team and how things would be run, the approach pays off. Because you form the team and the project team by giving them a common task, specifically risk management, which may not be what they prefer, therefore gradually developing that risk mindset. Because you relied on the team members to freely give the perspectives. You provide the structure, they provide expertise, and from my experience, they feel empowered by doing so. And that's a major component of performance project teams. And finally, because you moved into product requirements in a contextual way rather than from a blank sheet of paper. So these are the three outcomes of that small methodology. And like some acknowledgements, because I'm not the only one who designed that actually, it was made with some inspiration from quality people and people I worked with and project teams I worked with in the past. So that's a small acknowledgement. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you will try this in your next projects. And I'd like to open the floor for questions now.
Thank you, Mr. Vincent Marguerite. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for you to ask any questions that you have. You can raise your questions to our keynote speaker. You can unmute yourself, or else you can use the chat box. Any questions, please?
Hello.
Yeah, hi, Nimita.
Hi, Shivantika. Yeah,
Hi.
I do have a concern, like a question regarding risk log and issue log. So I've been hearing these terms a lot. So I want to understand when do we create those? What should be the difference? I understood the difference, the way it has been discussed, that risk is something is about to happen or something which will happen in future, or issue which has already happened. So what how does a risk register or a issue log look like? What is the difference? At what stages do we maintain that?
That's a good question. So the risk register is mainly what I use for that presentation because we were more focusing on risks. And it's really statement of the risk, as I mentioned, who's the owner of the risk, what's the mitigation strategy, what's the probability, what's the impact, and then usually have that multiplication between probability and impact to give you a score, which help you classify actually and put that in a kind of risk hierarchy. But it's all about risks. Issue, as you said, that has happened. So that's, to me, that's a different log. That's a different perspective, but that has to be managed in parallel. Because when a risk has materialized, well, clearly it's not a risk anymore. So you can actually close it within the risk register, but then something has to appear, a line has to appear in the issue log, because obviously that risk has materialized itself, it's transformed. So we're not dealing with a risk anymore or managing this as a risk, but this is a proper issue that we have. So they're both complementary in a way within projects. Both logs have to be opened at the beginning of a project, because even before the risk and opportunity assessment, you may have some issues. I hope not, but it may happen, and you need to keep track of them. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. That answers. I do have one follow-up question. So what if some risk doesn't happen? So how do I record that? Should I close it in the risk register itself, or should I still take it in a issue log and say it has not happened? I'm not sure of something which has occurred. Okay, I'm taking it into a issue log. That's great. What if something hasn't occurred? Where do I close this? Where do I show that line item?
When it has not occurred, well, it stays in the risk register because it might still be a risk. But to your question, it might be that within the next phase of your project, that risk is simply not relevant anymore because it was linked to a specific situation from the previous phase. So in our case, the risk is closed, but remains in the risk register for traceability reasons.
Okay.
It's simply closed because if the risk is not relevant anymore, well, it's just not there. So you just close it, but leave it in the risk log.
Thank you, Vincent. That helps. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Hi, Ms. Vincent. Thank you so much for your informative session. I just have one question regarding, are there any specific tools and techniques whether we can identify those risks and also the setting the priority of those risks?
So yeah, it's a good question actually. There are so many techniques and tools on risk management. And if you go to the internet, you have a look at the PMBOK actually, you have the Monte Carlo analysis or something related to value as well. So more on the financial side. And I didn't want to go into details here because I wanted to really keep the overall structure of the concept here. But there are some of the tools. Monte Carlo is one of them actually to enhance probabilities of detecting risks, really, based on business case. There's another one, I can't remember the name actually, but it's like, well, if it fails, it will cost that amount of money, but if it fails later, it will cost even more. So what is actually the less or the least worst case scenario in our case that we can use? The thing is, what you have to keep in mind, as I mentioned, in some project teams, some experts or team members or subject matter experts are simply not familiar with risk management at all. So risk, or financial people usually are, because that's what they do for a living, basically. And it's good to have them in a project team. But some technical experts, they have their way, they're so into whether IT or mechanics or, scientific, what have you. They're so into their field of activity that risk to them is something kind of obvious within what they know, but without context. So the idea, as I mentioned, is really to explain them, okay, let's be creative here. Let's forget about techniques. Let's use something very simple that we all know. If something happens, then that's the consequence, and that leads to that impact. And this, everybody understands. So, and everybody loves to participate in that because it triggers, some creativity that, well, they may not have in the, business as usual days, really. So that something a bit refreshing for these people. And I had that with a couple of scientists on an R&D project. And they're like, hey, we love that session, and the next time we spoke, it's like, hey, we identified 10 new risks, we discussed that together. Like, well, that's great, actually. I know it's not something I have to do, but because it is a simple way of doing it, but it's actually extremely efficient. So my advice is to keep that technique fast. It's very participative, and the team really enjoy it. And sometimes they all speak together at the same time. So you're like the project manager, hey, please, one at a time, so if them, etc., then let's move on to you. Rather than jumping straight into more complex techniques that you can have on the internet or in PMICSL book. And lastly, something I tried recently actually on ChatGPT is actually when you do a correct prompt about your project, the scope, this is what we'd like to deliver. That's the scope of the project, the customer, the end users, the environment, the market, etc. Proper scope. And you can actually, what would be the risks actually on those different field of expertise, and you get actually a very good answer, which can help you just facilitate the risk and opportunity assessment. It's not perfect because it's still ChatGPT, but it's a solid basis as to, okay, so we have a risk in regulatory, we may have risk in compliance, we may have legal risks here, depending on the laws. So how can we actually put them in a more detailed way in the risk log? Did I manage to answer your question after my lengthy answer? Sorry.
Yes, thank you so much.
Mr. Vincent, we have another question in
Sure.
chat box. Yeah, Kavinda from Sri Lanka is asking, is it good practice adding the risk to the risk matrix after the closure? Shifting risk register to risk matrix and reduce RPN. Is it clear, Mr. Vincent?
So RPN?
Kavinda, are you with
Yes,
us?
of course.
Yeah,
Thank you,
please.
Vincent. So just I meant that normally we, as a practice, we are maintaining RPN in the risk matrix. It means risk priority number based upon the what we call it probability, impact, and
Yep.
based upon the detectability, we calculate RPN. I mean, we are normally scaling all those probability, impact, and detectability value based upon assigning the value based upon the 1 to 10, the 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest. So what I'm asking is it good practice to adding? So normally what we are doing is we are maintaining risk register after we avoiding, I mean, after we completing the, I mean, avoiding and do the necessary to avoid the risk related in the register. Is it okay to shift the risk from the register to the risk matrix and reduce the RPN value? I mean, is it a good practice as per the process and all those necessary stuff?
So yeah, I would say it depends the project and the type of industry you're in. When you say after closure, it's after the project closure, right?
No, actually, it's not after the closure, after the closure of the risk. So normally in risk register, we are maintaining risk points. I mean, point wise, we are maintaining risk. So what I'm asking is after the project, after the risk one or any point of risk closure, after the closure, is it okay to shifting this risk into the risk metrics and reduce the RPM? I mean, is it a good practice keeping the closed risk in the our documentation or our system? Is it okay? And I'm asking, is it okay to having it in risk metrics?
So it is actually a very good practice, because the first thing is that there is no closure before the end of the project. So risks, it's something extremely dynamic, and you may encounter risk or new risks every now and then in your projects, or depending on the phase of the project. So the risk register clearly is something that is open and that is closed at the very last minutes, together with all the register you have in your project, once the project is getting closed. Some risk, obviously, they may be extremely high at the beginning or for a different situation. And as you move along in the project, well, they will naturally reduce, because the situation that actually may provoke that risk is attenuated or mitigated or not there anymore. So which means that the risk will actually go down in terms of priority. So the risk that typically could be red at the beginning or extremely high, on which you put the proper mitigation strategy, may actually go down to the green zone and extremely low, actually, in terms of priority, because it had been properly mitigated. So dynamically, well, the RPM number will change. So it is definitely a good practice. And I actually encourage a project manager to speak about risk and opportunities during every team meeting, or at least once a week. It's just a simple question. It's about, hey, have you identified new risks last week during your work, actually, on that project? Yes, no? And if yes, then you log that into the risk register. And once in a month, or depending on, again, the project itself, it's good to spend a proper session dedicated to risk and opportunities together with the team, just to review them. I mean, it might take 15 minutes, might take half an hour. It's like, okay, let's review the risk log. What we have, is it still up to date? Let's review all the different priorities, probability and impact. Can we change that? Do we have any updates on the mitigation strategies? Yes, no. So you keep that updated, and naturally, as you say, Govinda, well, risks are going to be reshuffled. So suddenly one is going to be, oh, that's extremely high. We need to be careful here. Another one is like, well, that was high. Well, it's great, actually, because now it's a low priority.
Okay, thank you, Vincent. Thank you very much for the clear answer.
Pleasure.
I think we have another question again from Nilita.
Yeah, I have a
Please go
follow-up
ahead.
question. Thank you. I have two questions actually. One is the follow-up from the recent discussion we had, just to confirm if I understood correctly. So regarding you mentioned that risk priority and probability impact could change. Eventually, my RPN could also change. So how do I reflect it in my template? So is it worth or best practice showing the version as well, that this risk was high or number one priority earlier, now it is number two, or it has been changing? Like, how is it worth showing, or is it irrelevant information or too much information, we should avoid that? Or how would you advise on that, please?
So it's good points, which is linked to reporting, actually, because within the project team, as project manager, you know exactly where you are, but it might not be the case for some of your stakeholders or the project sponsor. So it's good to have that, red, orange, green matrix, dating from time to time. Every time they need to have a report, or at least once a month, just like as I was explaining to Kavinda, just when you review all the risks, you update that small matrix, and then what changed is actually you just put some text below. It's like, well, those risks that were actually extremely high the last time we reported them are now low because of short mitigation strategy and explanation. But we identified or we updated some risks that were there too high because they are more likely to happen in the near future, depending on the situation. So just to keep your stakeholders informed, that's where the risks are evolving, and so is the metrics and your risk register.
Okay. Okay, yeah, thanks. That helps. And one more question I originally had was around lesson learned register with relation to this risk register and issue log. So whenever I encounter risk, they might end up into issue log, and of course from there we might have learnings as well. So how do we trace that? Should we like from best practice perspective, I want to understand, should I just use issue log also as kind of a lesson learned register? So, or there should be another line item in my lesson learned register with the ID that, hey, this learning is coming from that risk, or how should that look like, maybe?
That's, yeah, there's actually several ways of doing that, actually. So to me, the lesson learned session, which is the most important at the closure of the project, really brings all the things together. So you have your risk register and things that never materialized, but it's good to have them for the next project, really. And the issues that happened that have been solved. So that's the best basis for the lesson learned. Because like, okay, then it goes back to some kind of risk assessment here, within the philosophy at least. It's like, well, is there any possibility that we could have avoided that issue when it happened? And in terms of lesson learned, it's more, well, what can we do best next time to make sure that this issue here never happens? Is it really linked to a risk that we identified and then has materialized? So that happens, and that's not your fault as a project manager. It simply happens. But then the question is, well, how can we make sure that it doesn't happen again? Or if it's a risk that remains in the risk log, and I disclose like, well, we know that for this specific context, that risk never materialized, but it's still somehow it's still there, and it might happen in the next project or in an update. And I can give you one of the strongest risks actually that we lived with in my previous project, and that was related to reputation of the company. If we launch that product, for sure we're going to have the press, the FDA, health institutions, etc., on our neck, because they're all going to try to find in a way just to damage the product, really, or damage our reputation. So the question was, well, how do we mitigate that? So it's communication, it's press team, etc., etc. But we still, that's a residual risk that you live with. And the decision was, well, that's something we can accept. Clearly, we can mitigate, but we still accept to have that risk. We'll mitigate as much as we can within all the teams that can work on our reputation. And that's a pretty big thing, actually, for a company. But still, that's what we do. So we'll keep that. And that's something that remains all along the project and the product life as well. So it's like, well, that's basically part of the company. So there's nothing you can really do with that. But it's good to, even if it is accepted and it may or may not occur, etc., that kind of damage, it's good to have it in your risk log for the next project, because that's one of the very first risks that will come back for a similar project in the future. It's like, well, last time we had this, be careful, we have a similar situation here. It might happen. How do we mitigate that? Let's not forget this. So it's part of lesson learned.
So just to confirm, so depending upon the type of a risk issue, it could probably be repetitive in lesson learned registered as well.
Correct.
So I was concerned about over documentation. So what I'm doing in issue log, I might end up doing in lesson learned, but it could surely depend upon the situation that do I want to record it in the lesson learned separately and have other things around that.
Yeah, it's better. I mean, my advice is to have everything in lesson learned,
Okay.
because that's, let's say, if there's only one document you reuse for the next project, that's this one. And then you can dig into more details about how things were managed actually in that previous project, in the risk register, on the issue log, etc. But the lesson learned should actually be the reference points of everything that happened in the previous projects.
Yeah, thank you. That's super helpful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Nivita. Mr. Yes.
Yeah, there's another question here.
Yeah, I
from
think
Steph.
there's a lot of questions. Thank you. May I know?
Yeah, here Malaka, thank you very much for the informative session that we had with Mr. Vincent. And I have one question. When it comes to general risk management, we have multiple different strategies like accept, either transfer or mitigate or avoid. So is the same strategies applies to the project management, risk management as well? That's my first question. The second question, if it is so what are the risk transfer strategies we can use in the project management business, sir?
What are the what? Sorry, excuse me, I missed that.
Malaka, did you get my question, Mr. Vincent?
No, the line was a bit cut off actually.
Yeah, let me come back again. So my question was that when it comes to risk management strategies, then we can accept the risk, we can transfer the risk, we can avoid the risk, we can mitigate the risk. So is the same strategies apply to the project management, risk management aspect as well? That's my first question. The second one is when it comes to transfer the risk, how we can transfer risk in the project management? Is it possible or it is not possible in the project management?
Okay, yeah, that's good points. So those response type in risks actually, usually, I mean, the first one that comes to mind is, okay, there's a risk here. How can we mitigate it? I mean, usually, how can we mitigate or reduce? And that's the one that really is natural. But somehow, I mean, like the example I used with Nivita, I mean, reputation is something that you can mitigate, but you have to accept it. I mean, that's basically what you do. So you accept it. The person who will validate this is the project sponsor. So that's the responsibility of the project sponsor to ultimately give the final answer to how a risk should be managed. It's good for the project manager to make suggestions and to encourage the team to make suggestions, but ultimately the approval comes from the sponsor, because the project sponsor is accountable for the delivery of the project, so for the final products. That's for I hope I answered the first question. Transfer is usually you transfer the risk to a third party. So to give you an example, well, we have a risk in how production plants with that kind of plastic, for instance, if you manufacture plastic parts for the automotive industries, we have a risk of damaging the machine or overloading the process, etc. So you might want to transfer that risk to a third party, so namely to another company that will take care of this risk for you. So that means transfer. Basically, someone else is responsible for managing the risk, and that's basically their problem. But if it happens, well, that's going to be your problem because it goes back to the issue log. But their role is actually to take care of that risks on their side. Did I answer your question here?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
Yeah, if you take insurance cover, that means that you are transferring the risk to that insurance company, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good example. I mean, insurance company is always a good example. Yeah, it's true. Or third-party providers.
Actually, that's something what I had in my mind. I just wanted to confirm, is it possible when it comes to the project management?
Yeah. Again, that's something, that kind of decision, that's something that comes from the product sponsor. I mean, the project manager is going to run the workshop and outlines all the risk mitigation and strategies and different responses that you may have. But then the sponsor is actually more connected to, corporates and top management usually. And he or she will decide, okay, well, let's take that decision after it has been informed. And then informing. So whether you want to mitigate internally this risk or transfer it, usually it goes down to money and how much will it cost? I mean, you get that answer every now and then. It's like, okay, is it cheaper to actually transfer that in terms of overall organization or not?
I think we had a wonderful session, Mr. Vincent. So let me ask just one question. Sorry if I'm troubling you. When coming to the project management methodologies, we have agile and the waterfall, two extreme methodologies. So risk to requirement, when you are practicing it, especially how you can practice this risk to requirement, that concept in agile implementation projects.
Yeah, so it's a good point. Agile is, I know the principle, obviously. I'm not an expert in that. The thing about Agile is, I mean, you really define the scope as you run your project, right? Because you have all these iterations here. So it's actually pretty hard to include that kind of methodology, even though, as you saw in the presentation, it starts with the scope of the project. So I'll leave you with something. So you have the scope of the project, and then that scope in Agile will be refined and refined and refined again together with the customer or the end user, who will actually say, oh yeah, no, I'd like that blue or red or that button here or something. Which means that, well, risk to requirements is extremely dynamic here, because you have your backlog or your product logged in Agile. But then next to that, if you want to have your risk log, which triggers all the mitigations and what you have to do to feed the product log, then I guess we could do it that way. The problem, though, is that in Agile, one of the principles is not too much documentation, right? So that might be a bit of a burden to do that in a pure Agile project. Hybrid, it works when you start traditional or waterfall or hybrid. When you start in the traditional way, then it's like, okay, let's kick off the project in a different way. Agile is still a bit trickier because, I mean, it's already so creative that adding that layer of creativity from risk to requirement may be an overkill. I mean, that's probably, I would see it that way, especially with software engineers who already are extremely super creative. But that's, yeah, I've never tried it in Agile. I doubt I'd do it because, again, it might be just an extra burden.
Okay, thank you so much. So, Shivantika?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Vincent Magua. I think we had very wonderful, interactive, and insightful session. Thank you very much. So
thank you for having me.
Is my pleasure. So it's my distinct honor to invite to the virtual stage our esteemed President, Mr. Saman Kandararachi, to deliver the certificate of participation to our distinguished keynote speaker, Mr. Vincent Magua. And at the same time, I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Mr. Vincent, to the virtual stage to accept a token of our appreciation. Mr. Vincent, your contribution has been invaluable, and we would like to present you with the participation appreciation certifications as a small token of our gratitude. Please accept, Mr. Saman.
Thank you very much. That's definitely accepted. Thanks a lot. I was not expecting that, but appreciate that. And I'll be happy to come back again, that's for sure. Well, anyway, Saman has my email address, so he knows where to find me now.
Actually speaking, Mr. Vincent, this is a very much interactive session. And after a long time, a lot of participants joined. So around 75, 76 participants joined actually today's session. So we're really glad and happy you joined with us on this session actually. So Shivantika, it's over to you now. Share the PDU and proceed. Thank you, Mr. Vincent.
Thank you,
Thanks a
Mr.
lot.
Kadarachi. Thank you, Vincent. That was really amazing session. And thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and making today's event so special. Right, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for me to invite one of the advisors of PMICSL Columbus Sri Lanka chapter, Mr. Aruna Puragama, to deliver the vote of thanks. After that, I would like to share the PD codes of today's event. Mr. Puragama, over to you, please.
Thank you, Shivantika. Thank you, Saman. Good evening, everyone. It has been such an honor to be part of this wonderful event today. On behalf of PMI Sri Lanka chapter, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speaker, Mr. Vincent Magua, consultant life sciences and programs and projects. Thank you very much for your presence today to enlighten today's event and the sharing of your knowledge and wisdom. Also my sincere thanks to PMI Sri Lanka chapter, board of directors, and our key volunteers of PMI Sri Lanka chapter who handled the event throughout at extreme success. A wide round of applause and thanks to all the participants who made this event a memorable one. Finally, I would like to thank all of you, your presence here for making the time to be with us today and helping us making this event grand success. Thank you, one and all. Over to you, Shivantika.
Thank you, Mr. Puragama, for delivering the vote of thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, let me share the PD code with us. Yes. Yes, you can take down the PD code. You can upload this PD code in your PMI folders. Do you want me to share the codes in the chat box? Just let me know. Right.
Shivantika, I think we are having another session on December 1st week or 2nd week, I think. Online session. Please, we can share it also.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have another physical event that is shared.
The physical session on 29th November and online session on December. Again, we will meet again online session December.
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Saman Kadraj, for sharing all the details with our members. Ladies and gentlemen, now we have come to the end of the session. As we have come to the end of the session, I want to express my sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for your active participation and valuable contributions. Your engagement has made this event truly special. Special thanks goes to our keynote speaker, Mr. Vincent Maguire, for his wonderful, insightful, and interactive session, for sharing his knowledge with our participants. Thanks again, sir. So before we officially conclude the session, let's capture a moment together with a group photo. I would like to switch on your camera. We have 65 participants as of now. So, wow, it's happy to see you all. You are the strength behind our chapter. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining with us. Really happy this much of crowd joining with us.
Okay, on the count of 1, 2, 3, say cheese, right? 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
1, let me take another one. Excuse me. Right. Wow. I'm so happy to see all of you joining with us. Okay, we have to take two. Let me take another one. Okay. Sorry for taxing your time. Yes, I captured all sweet memories.
So have a nice day.
Thank you very much for joining with us, and I would like to meet you again coming physical member forum, which is scheduled on 29th November, as well as next online member forum on December. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Ishwan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks a
Vincent.
lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for-
Have a good evening. Bye, guys.
Have a good evening. Bye.
Great day.